History is often taught as a list of dates, battles, and men with alarming mustaches, but the reality is a lot messier than that. It loops, it repeats, and occasionally invents things again, but louder. So you might be thinking, didn't we cover some of this before? Well, technically, yes, we did. But because World War II had a habit of taking sensible inventions, grabbing them by the collar, and shouting, right now, make it work properly. So, yes, radar existed before the war, so did engines, and so did code breaking. But wartime Britain didn't just invent these things per se, it forced them to grow up very quickly, kind of like a teenager sent straight into the factory with a clipboard and no emotional support. So that's why we'll be revisiting a few familiar things today. Not because Britain was out of ideas, but because war has a funny way of turning interesting concepts into absolute necessities by next Thursday. World War II wasn't just a conflict of armies, it was a competition over who could see first, think better, calculate fastest, and panic more efficiently. Britain was very good at the panic part. So instead of new inventions, this is an episode about transformations. The moment when radar stopped being experimental and started winning battles, when code breaking stopped being clever and started shortening the war, and when electronics stopped being unreliable and became unavoidable. In short, this episode is going to be where Britain took a handful of clever ideas and stress tested them against Hitler, which is not something I recommend doing lightly. So, yes, some inventions are back. But this time they're running faster, angrier, and on wartime tea. So let's go back to 1940s Britain, where things were invented under blackout conditions and on ration cards, and with absolutely no free time for nonsense. Before radar, war relied on the cutting edge technology of looking. This was deeply flawed, especially at night when there were clouds or when enemy warcraft were several miles away and very fast. Britain's solution was radar, short for radio detection and ranging, which uses radio waves to detect objects that you can't see with your eye, much like echolocation, but with machines instead of dolphins. The key British breakthrough came in the mid 1930s, like we discussed before, by Sir Robert Watt, a physicist who realized that radio waves bounced off of aircrafts. By 1935, Watt had successfully demonstrated that radio waves could detect flying planes miles away, which was useful because by 1939, Germans had a lot of planes. Britain rapidly built a nationwide radar network called Chain Home that stretched from coast to coast. And this wasn't subtle technology. These towers were enormous. They were visible from miles away, which is probably why the Germans bombed them often. Because Chain Home didn't need to be destroyed, just damaged, and the British repaired it faster than the Luftwaffe could knock it out. During the Battle of Britain in 1940, radar allowed for RAF to see German aircraft forming up, predict when they would strike, and launch planes only as needed. And this mattered a lot because Britain had fewer pilots and fewer planes. Radar meant that Britain didn't have to guess, it could choose, which is not something you want your enemy to be able to do. Winston Churchill later said that radar was the decisive technology in deciding the war. And he was right, and also very pleased with himself. Now, yes, radar was impressive, but early radar had a few problems. It wasn't very accurate. Enter one of the most important inventions you've probably never heard of, the cavity magnetron. In 1940, British scientists John Randall and Harry Boot at the University of Birmingham invented a device that had high-powered microwaves. This allowed radar to become more accurate, smaller, and airborne. Suddenly, radar could be fitted into ships, aircrafts, and even submarines. This meant Britain could detect U-boats, traffic aircraft much more precisely, and navigate even through bad weather, which is very important to be able to do here. And the most wild part about this invention, the British gave it to the United States of America for free. An American official later said that the most valuable cargo ever brought to our shores was this invention, which is a polite way of saying, thank you for winning the war. Without the magnetron, no modern radar would exist, no air traffic controlling would exist, no weather radar, and no microwave ovens for those Americans to microwave their tea. We don't really do that, just so you know. But yes, your reheated lasagna in the microwave is a product of World War II engineering. Now, war isn't just fought with bombs, it's also fought with information. And Britain cheated a little bit in this department. At Bletchley Park, a group of mathematicians, linguists, chess champions, and people who looked like they had never been invited to a party gathered to break German codes. The most famous name here being Alan Turing. This was not a one-man operation, though. The Germans used the Enigma machine, which changed its encryption daily, creating billions of possible combinations for codes. Breaking it by hand was pretty much impossible, so Britain built machines. Early machines called the bombs helped break the Enigma. So Britain built the Colossus. Completed in 1943, the Colossus was fully electronic, programmable, and digital, which technically makes it the first fully electronic, programmable computer in history. It was designed by Tommy Flowers, a British engineer who delivered electronics, and he could work at scale, despite everyone else insisting vacuum tubes were just unreliable. They were wrong. The Colossus helped break Lorenz cipher, a high-level German communication system. This allowed for allies to determine what German troop movements were going to be, deceive the enemy on D-Day, and shorten the war by an estimated 2 years. The Colossus actually remained secret until the 1970s, which is why Britain doesn't get much credit for inventing the first computer. Everyone instead just says, wasn't that Apple? No, it was a man in wartime Britain surrounded by valves, wires, and a little bit of existential dread. During the war, Britain invented something even more strange than computers. It invented thinking about decisions scientifically. This became known as operations research. The idea was simple: stop relying on instinct, use data, and test outcomes. British scientists, they investigated and analyzed bomber formations, convoy spacing, and aircraft armor placement. One famous example included aircraft returning from bombing missions. The planes were filled with bullet holes, and the initial strength was reinforce and fill the bullet holes. But a British analyst named Abraham Wald pointed out that planes that didn't return had been hit elsewhere. So Britain reinforced the areas without damage, and this saved lives. Operations research later became logistics planning, business analytics, economic modeling, and management science. Every spreadsheet you have ever hated traces its ancestry to Britain trying not to lose those bomber planes. Britain faced several material shortages during World War II, including rubber, metals, and fuel. This accelerated research into synthetic materials such as plastic, polymers, and synthetic rubber substitutes. British chemists expanded the use of polyethylene, originally discovered right here in Britain during 1933. Now, polyethylene became crucial for radar cable insulation, electric wiring, and lightweight components that could, fit in those bomber planes. And after the war, these materials flooded everyday civilian life, which is why modern life is convenient, durable, and slightly too plastic. War is temporary, plastic is forever. Now, yes, we covered jet engines, I know, but World War II changed them quite a lot. As we talked about before, British engineer Frank Whittle patented this idea in 1930, but wartime pressure forced a rapid development in this jet engine. By 1941, Britain flew the Glossier E-28 and 39, the first British jet aircraft. As we said before, too, jets offered higher speeds, greater altitudes, and a strategic advantage in that. And just like radar, Britain shared these wartime inventions with its allies. And then quickly watched these allies commercialize these items even better, which is sadly the most British ending possible. Now, World War II didn't just end fascism. I hope it stays ended. It also created modern computing, data science, radar and navigation, electronic communications, which is how we're talking here right now, systems thinking, which some systems could think a little harder, if you know what I mean, and our modern materials of plastic, everything. But, back when it was a good thing. Now, Britain didn't invent these things just because it wanted to. Britain invented these things because it had to, which is often how progress works. After the war, Britain dismantled much of the research infrastructure, and the scientists went home. Then these secrets were declassified decades later, and history quietly forgot about its foundations. So when you see GPS, you fly home safely at night, you heat your leftovers, you trust computers? Do we though? Or when you navigate digitally, you are living inside of inventions that were born in blackout conditions in Britain under air raids and by people who were very, very tired and probably quite annoyed. Now, World War II is remembered for its horror, but it also marks the moment when the modern world snapped into existence. Not only because of grand speeches, but because Britain looked at chaos and said, we'll need a system for that. Britain didn't just survive World War II, it engineered a future while doing it. Which one of these was your favorite? Or which one of these do you see in your everyday life now? I mean, we're using the internet, we're using computers. If you're enjoying these Britain invented everything videos, let me know in the comments below. And please let me know future categories you'd like me to cover. Please like, subscribe, hit that little comment button. And until the next one, I'll see you soon.